10,000 years ago, a single figure walked out of the wilderness of a shattered world and began the work of uniting a broken species. He carried no army at first and no fleet, only a conviction that humanity's fractured and warring tribes could be forged into something greater than the sum of their endless quarrels. By the time his work was finished, he had built an empire spanning 1,000,000 worlds, created warriors who could not be killed by conventional means, and set in motion events that would define the fate of the galaxy for 10 millennia to come. Yet the same ambition that raised humanity to its greatest heights also produced its greatest catastrophe, a betrayal so total that its wounds have never fully healed. Who was this figure, and how did his vision give rise to both salvation and ruin in equal measure? This is the story of the Emperor of mankind and of the war that broke the galaxy in two. The origins of the Emperor remain, even after 10,000 years of study, a matter shrouded in uncertainty and myth. What can be established with confidence is that he did not emerge suddenly, but had existed in some form for tens of thousands of years before his role in human history became apparent, moving quietly among humanity's earliest tribal societies, guiding their development from the shadows rather than ruling openly. Scholars generally agree that he was not born in any conventional sense, but arose from the collective psychic potential of the human species itself, a consciousness that coalesced gradually across countless generations until it achieved a singular, unified form. For millennia, he worked unseen, shepherding scattered human societies through their earliest struggles, appearing in various guises within the folklore and religious traditions of ancient Terra, though never revealing the full scope of his nature or his ultimate purpose. The Terra to which the Emperor eventually turned his full attention was a world scarred by ages of catastrophe. Centuries of ecological collapse, nuclear conflict, and the rise and fall of technologically advanced but morally corrupt societies had reduced humanity's homeworld to a fractured landscape of warring petty kingdoms, technological regression, and profound superstition. It was from this ruin that the Emperor resolved to build anew, choosing to reveal himself fully and begin the work of reunification during an age remembered as the Age of Strife, a period defined by the near-total collapse of interstellar civilization and the terrifying deterioration of humanity's relationship with the warp, that turbulent psychic dimension underlying reality which had grown increasingly hostile to human minds as the Age of Strife progressed. It was in this context, amid warring tribes and psychic storms that made travel between the stars nearly impossible, that the Emperor began his great work on Terra itself. And it was there, in this shattered cradle of humanity, that his first and most consequential experiments in the creation of warriors capable of reclaiming the galaxy would begin. The earliest of these experiments produced what came to be known as the Thunder Warriors, genetically enhanced soldiers created through techniques that granted them extraordinary strength, resilience, and combat capability far beyond that of ordinary humans. The Thunder Warriors served as the Emperor's first instrument in the unification of Terra itself, sweeping across the fractured continents in a campaign that came to be called the Unification Wars, crushing rival warlords and bringing the scattered kingdoms of Terra under a single banner for the first time in centuries. They were formidable beyond anything the shattered world had seen since the height of its ancient civilizations, yet their creation carried a hidden cost. The genetic processes that granted them their extraordinary power also proved unstable over time, causing many Thunder Warriors to suffer from premature aging and a gradual, irreversible decline that shortened their lives dramatically, even as it enhanced their strength. Recognizing that his creation, however effective in the short term, was fundamentally unsustainable, the Emperor set the Thunder Warriors aside once Terra's unification was complete, turning his considerable genius toward a successor project, one designed to avoid the flaws that had doomed his first generation of soldiers to a swift and painful end. That successor project would produce the Space Marines, warriors engineered through a considerably more refined and stable application of genetic science than the one that had created the Thunder Warriors before them. Central to their creation was the implantation of a series of specially engineered organs, collectively referred to as the gene seed, which, when successfully implanted in a carefully selected human subject during adolescence, triggered a cascade of physiological transformations over subsequent years. The resulting warrior possessed superhuman strength, enhanced reflexes, resistance to injury and disease that bordered on the miraculous, and a physiology capable of surviving conditions that would kill an unmodified human many times over. Unlike the Thunder Warriors, whose power came at the cost of a foreshortened life, the Space Marines were built to endure, capable of serving in active warfare for centuries, their bodies remaining functional and formidable long after any ordinary soldier would have succumbed to age or accumulated injury. It was, in the fullest sense, the culmination of everything the Emperor had learned from his earlier experiments. A warrior designed not merely to win a single campaign, but to serve as the permanent instrument of a lasting galactic order. Yet even the Space Marines, extraordinary as they were, required leadership suited to the scale of the Emperor's ultimate ambition, which extended far beyond the reunification of a single world. To command the armies he intended to raise, the Emperor undertook his most audacious project yet, the creation of 20 superhuman beings known as the Primarchs, each engineered to possess not only the physical enhancements granted to ordinary Space Marines, but intellect, charisma, and martial capability on a scale that bordered on the divine. Each Primarch was intended to lead a legion of Space Marines bearing his own genetic template, and each was designed with distinct qualities suited to different aspects of the war of reunification the Emperor foresaw. But the Emperor's plan for his sons suffered a catastrophic disruption before it could properly begin. In circumstances that remain debated even now, the Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy, their gestation capsules torn from Terra by forces that some scholars attribute to the machinations of the warp itself, others to the direct intervention of hostile powers who recognized the threat these beings represented. Separated from their father and from one another, the infant Primarchs were cast down upon widely scattered worlds throughout the galaxy, each growing to maturity in isolation, shaped by the particular circumstances and cultures of the worlds that received them. What followed was a period in which each Primarch, entirely unaware of his true origin or his siblings' existence, rose to prominence on his adopted world through feats of extraordinary capability that marked him as something far beyond ordinary mortal limits. On the feral world of Fenris, a Primarch grew among warrior tribes and came to be known as Lemon Russ, a fierce and formidable leader whose followers would become the Space Wolves. On a world torn by industrial exploitation, another Primarch rose in rebellion against tyranny and became Vulcan, whose compassion for the common laborer would define the character of his legion, the Salamanders. Other Primarchs rose to power through conquest, through philosophy, through the founding of empires that rivaled small kingdoms in their own right, each unknowingly echoing, in miniature, the very work their unseen father was undertaking on Terra. It would be years, in some cases decades, before the Emperor's own search across the galaxy succeeded in locating each of his lost sons, reuniting them one by one with the vast enterprise he had built in their absence, and integrating each newly discovered Primarch into command of the Space Marine Legion that had been created in his image. With the Primarchs gradually reunited with their father, and with Terra itself fully unified under the Emperor's authority, the stage was set for the undertaking that would define the height of human civilization, the Great Crusade. Beginning roughly 2 centuries after the completion of Terra's unification, the Great Crusade represented humanity's return to the stars on a scale never before attempted, an ambition to reclaim the countless human worlds that had been scattered and isolated during the long centuries of the Age of Strife, while also bringing under imperial authority the numerous alien species and independent human polities that had arisen in humanity's long absence from galactic affairs. Vast fleets, each bearing one or more Space Marine legions under the personal command of a Primarch, departed Terra in expeditionary forces that would spend decades pushing outward across the galaxy, liberating lost human colonies, conquering worlds that resisted incorporation, and steadily expanding the boundaries of what would come to be called the Imperium of Man. The Great Crusade proceeded with extraordinary momentum for nearly 2 centuries, and its successes were staggering in both scale and speed. World after world fell under imperial authority, sometimes through diplomacy, more often through overwhelming military force delivered by Space Marine legions, whose capabilities far exceeded anything most isolated human colonies could hope to resist. Each Primarch brought his own particular style of command to the campaign, and the personalities that had been shaped by their years of separate upbringing on widely different worlds became increasingly apparent as the Crusade progressed. Some, like Robert Guilliman, favored careful administration and the establishment of stable, well-governed territories in the wake of conquest. Others, like the fierce and increasingly troubled Angron, approached warfare with a ferocity that bordered on the uncontrollable, a product of the brutal circumstances of his upbringing that even his reunification with his father could never fully soothe. Among all the Primarchs, however, one figure rose to particular prominence as the Great Crusade advanced, a commander whose brilliance, charisma, and battlefield success marked him as first among equals. Horus, Primarch of the Lunar Wolves, later renamed the Sons of Horus, who would eventually be granted the unprecedented title of War Master, placing him in supreme command of the Great Crusade's military operations, answerable only to the Emperor himself. It was under Horus's leadership that the Great Crusade reached its greatest heights, extending imperial authority across a truly staggering portion of the galaxy, and cementing his reputation as the most capable and most beloved of all the Emperor's sons. Yet it was also during this period, as the Crusade approached what many believed would be its triumphant conclusion, that the seeds of catastrophe began, quietly and almost imperceptibly, to take root. The precise causes of what followed remain a matter of considerable historical debate, but the consensus among scholars points to a combination of factors: growing philosophical tension between the Emperor's increasingly secular vision for humanity's future and the more traditional, even reverent regard many of his sons and their followers held for him personally. Deep and largely unaddressed psychological wounds carried by several Primarchs from their years of isolated upbringing, and according to numerous surviving accounts, the direct and insidious influence of powers native to the warp itself, entities that recognized in the fracturing loyalties of the Emperor's sons an opportunity to strike a wound against humanity that might never fully heal. The catalyst for open rebellion is generally traced to a grievous injury Horus sustained during a campaign on the world of Davin, a wound that brought him to the edge of death and, according to the accounts of those present, left him profoundly altered in the aftermath of his recovery. Whether through genuine spiritual corruption inflicted during this period of vulnerability, or through the patient manipulation of advisors and allies already sympathetic to rebellion, Horus emerged from his convalescence a changed figure, one who had come to believe that the Emperor's vision for humanity's future represented a betrayal of everything the Great Crusade had been fought to achieve. What followed was a carefully orchestrated campaign to draw fellow Primarchs and their legions into open rebellion against Terra, a conspiracy that spread with alarming speed among legions whose own grievances and psychological wounds made them receptive to Horus's cause. Not every Primarch joined the rebellion. Several, recognizing the danger, remained fiercely loyal to the Emperor, setting the stage for a conflict that would ultimately pit brother against brother, legion against legion, in a civil war whose scale and brutality had no precedent in human history. The conflict that followed, remembered as the Horus Heresy, consumed the galaxy in warfare for 7 years, tearing apart the very fabric of the empire the Great Crusade had built. Entire worlds were laid waste as loyalist and traitor forces clashed across dozens of star systems, Space Marine Legion turning against Space Marine Legion in battles of a ferocity that dwarfed anything the Great Crusade itself had produced against external enemies. Perhaps the single most devastating episode of the entire war occurred on the Forge world of Istvan V, where Horus orchestrated the betrayal and near annihilation of legions that had remained loyal to the Emperor, luring them into a trap that resulted in catastrophic losses and marked the definitive, irreversible beginning of full-scale civil war. From that moment forward, there could be no negotiated peace, no reconciliation between brothers who had shed one another's blood in such staggering quantities. The war could end only in total victory for one side or the other. The climax of the Horus Heresy came with Horus's direct assault on Terra itself, bringing the full weight of his rebellion to bear against the very heart of the empire his father had built. The battle for Terra raged across the surface of humanity's homeworld with a fury that threatened to undo every achievement of the preceding centuries. Loyalist defenders fighting with desperate resolve against traitor forces determined to bring down the Imperium entirely. It was in the final stages of this battle that the Emperor himself, who had remained largely confined to Terra throughout the Great Crusade in order to oversee humanity's governance and pursue esoteric projects of his own, at last confronted Horus directly, engaging his former favorite son in single combat aboard Horus's own flagship. The duel that followed has become one of the most consequential moments in human history. A confrontation between father and son that determined in the most immediate and personal terms possible whether the Imperium would survive or collapse into ruin. The Emperor ultimately triumphed, but at a cost that would define the remainder of human history. Grievously wounded in the confrontation, his body damaged beyond any conventional means of healing, the Emperor was placed within a device known as the Golden Throne, a life-sustaining mechanism that preserved what remained of his physical existence while his consciousness continued to exert a profound and continuing influence over the Imperium's spiritual and psychic defenses. The aftermath of the Horus Heresy left the Imperium fundamentally and permanently altered. The rebellious legions that survived the war's conclusion fled into the depths of the warp, taking refuge in a region of corrupted space that would come to be called the Eye of Terror, from which they and their descendants would continue to threaten the Imperium for the next 10,000 years. The Loyalist legions, victorious but devastated, were reorganized into smaller chapters, a restructuring intended to prevent any future commander from ever again wielding the concentrated military power that had allowed Horus's rebellion to grow so catastrophically unchecked. And the Emperor himself, though technically alive, would never again walk among his subjects as he once had, his physical form sustained indefinitely upon the Golden Throne, his direct guidance replaced by the administrative structures of an empire now forced to govern itself in his prolonged and uncertain absence. The legacy of these events has shaped every subsequent chapter of imperial history. The Emperor, once a figure who walked openly among humanity's earliest tribes and led the armies of the Great Crusade in person, became instead an object of religious veneration, worshipped by billions across the Imperium as a divine protector, even as the precise nature of his continued existence remains a subject of considerable theological and scholarly disagreement. The Space Marine legions that once numbered among the mightiest fighting forces ever assembled were transformed permanently by the reorganization that followed the Heresy. Their successor chapters, carrying forward fragments of their original legion's identity and gene seed, while operating as smaller, more numerous, and more tightly controlled formations. And the wound opened by Horus's betrayal, the knowledge that the Emperor's own sons had turned against him and against the empire he had built, remains, even after 10,000 years, an open and unresolved trauma at the very heart of imperial civilization. A reminder that even the greatest achievements of human unity and ambition remain perpetually vulnerable to the frailties, however superhuman in scale, of those entrusted to uphold them.